Welcome to Kevin Deal Photography, where I take you on my journey through photography. On today's episode, we're going to be doing a review of the Viltrox 56mm f1.7. I'm pleased to announce the release of my Capture One and Lightroom presets, Metamorphic Portraits, The Sound of Silver, and Rangefinder. These are all available for purchase at my website. Go to kevindealphotography.com or check out a link in the description below. And now, on to today's episode. Welcome to today's episode. If you're not familiar with Kevin Deal Photography, we do gear reviews, tips, techniques, and tutorials, and sometimes we dive into film. If any of that sounds appealing to you, click the subscribe button below. One of my favorite things to review on this channel is lenses, and I'm always looking for lenses that are great value for my viewers. So I actually get excited when I get reached out to by companies to test out lenses, especially portrait lenses. If you watched my Viltrox 75mm 1.2 review, link in the description below, I declared that lens to not only be possibly the best third-party lens for the Fuji X Mount system, but it could hang with the native Fuji portrait lenses. They've been stepping up their game lately, so when they reached out to me regarding the 56mm 1.7, they had my attention. So we're going to spend today's episode testing out this lens for portraiture, street, and a little video. But first, let's go over the specs. The Viltrox 56mm 1.7 lens is an autofocus lens for the Fuji X Mount system. On an APS-C sensor, it gives you a similar perspective to 85mm in full frame. It has an aperture range of f1.7 to f16. Its optical design is 11 elements and 9 groups, and it has 9 rounded aperture blades. It has an angle of view of 29.8 degrees. Its minimum focusing distance is 0.55 meters or 1.8 feet. It has a magnification of 0.11. It has a 52mm front filter thread size, and it has a quiet STM motor. It has a USBC port on the lens for firmware updates. Its dimensions are 2.5 by 2.1 inches or 65 by 54 millimeters. It has a weight of 6 ounces or 171 grams, and it comes in at a street price of 180 US dollars. So all that sounds pretty awesome, but we're gonna have to go test this guy out in the field to be sure. I will say that the build quality on it right off the bat feels pretty awesome, but none of this matters if it doesn't take great pictures. So let's do a portrait session at a local studio here in Austin. For my first real-world test, I was booked to do a portrait session for an artist who was doing some promotional work for their upcoming podcast. It provided a perfect scenario for me to test out this new Viltrox 56mm 1.7. When I do these tests, I always bring a second lens to do a comparison, but I also do it for redundancy in case I don't like the lens that I'm testing out. So I brought the Sigma 56mm 1.4, which is a lens that I love, but it's about twice the price. And when you look at the examples that I show you on the screen, the Viltrox really holds its own against the Sigma. I have to really zoom into about 100 or 200% to see ever so slight improvements on the Sigma files, but I am telling you the differences are minuscule and the Sigma is almost twice the price. testing wasn't done there. I decided to take this Viltrox lens out to the streets to shoot some daytime and nighttime street photography. And overall, that 1.7 maximum aperture did an incredible job in low lighting situations, as I would expect it to. And I once again used this opportunity to test out a comparison between the Sigma and the Viltrox lenses. And once again, the Sigma in some areas was a little bit better, but not really much better, and it's almost twice the price. So for the money in these real world tests that I've conducted so far, I have to say that this Viltrox 56mm 1.7 did an incredible job. Now, because I converted my Fuji X-T20 to full spectrum infrared, I do test out infrared on this channel for Fuji lenses. And I can tell you this lens isn't a great performer. It's good up to about 2.8. A hotspot starts forming at f4, and then it gets progressively worse from there. So I've had the opportunity to use the Viltrox 56mm 1.7 XF lens out in the field, and I've developed some opinions about it. And while I thank Viltrox for giving me this lens to review, like all my reviews, this is going to be completely independent, and my opinions are going to be my own. Let's start with what I liked. It's light. At 6 ounces or 171 grams, this might be the lightest lens I've ever tested. I'm struggling to think of a lighter lens that I've tested for this channel. So if you got into the Fuji X system to be lighter, this lens will fill that need. Combined with the lightweight of this lens is the fact that it is small. If you watched my review of the Sigma 56mm 1.4 contemporary lens, I commented that it was the smallest portrait-centric lens that I've ever tested for the Fuji X Mount system. That is no longer the case. This Viltrox 56mm 1.7 is a little shorter. It's the type of lens you can take with you on every shoot because it's not going to take up space or weight in your bag. But none of that matters unless the image quality is there. So let's explore the image quality. What is considered to be good is subjective. Not everybody is looking for the same thing in a lens. For portraits, I want the lens to be sharp, produce punchy contrast, and have pleasing subject isolation. Based on the images I'm showing you right now, I believe that for a sub $200 lens, this Viltrox 56mm 1.7 meets those expectations. As we zoom in on the comparison of the Sigma 56mm versus the Viltrox 56mm, I can see tiny improvements in the sharpness and punchiness of the Sigma over the Viltrox. However, you do have to pixel peep to see it. When you're zoomed out, viewing your image the way it's going to be presented to the world, the differences are negligible. Considering the Sigma is almost twice as expensive as this lens, I think it's reasonable to say that the Viltrox has excellent image quality. Unbeknownst to me, the Sigma has had a price increase since I purchased mine. On B&H, it now goes for $529. So I actually misspoke when I said the Viltrox was almost twice the price. The Sigma is now well over twice the price of the Viltrox. The minimum focusing distance of the Viltrox is similar to the minimum focusing distance of the Sigma as well. And to my eyes, the differences between the maximum aperture of 1.4 and 1.7 made very little difference when I compared isolation and bokeh. The maximum aperture of 1.7 makes this lens suitable for night photography. All similar lenses I've tested in this budget category max out at a slightly darker 1.8. So I can say that this is the only lens I've ever tested this bright that sells new for under $200. That's quite an accomplishment. I found the performance of this lens for video to be acceptable. There was some focus breathing, so focus pulls aren't going to be perfect, but if you need a static headshot combined with your Fuji autofocus system, this lens will do an acceptable job for video. Combined with the autofocus of my Fuji X-H2, this lens performed well in real-world use. The STM motor was fast and overall, it was quiet. The focus ring on this lens is smooth and responsive. It has a tiny bit of resistance, which I actually like as I feel like I can dial in my focus more accurately. For $180, the build quality of this lens is exceptional. Yes, it's a hard plastic chassis, but plastics have gotten so much better over the years that I often prefer it over a metal finish if it means lowering the weight of my bag. I review plastic lenses all the time on this channel, and I have yet to have a plastic lens be an issue for me. The USB-C being built into the lens is a pro. Some manufacturers make proprietary bottom lens caps with USB-C built into them. If you lose that bottom lens cap, you have no way to update the firmware in your lens. Viltrox intelligently integrates the USB-C port into the lens, making the process of upgrading your firmware convenient. The price of $180 for a useful 1.7 maximum aperture portrait lens, to me, meets the criteria of being an excellent value. If you don't have a $300 to $400 budget for a lens like a Sigma, and definitely don't have $1,000 for a native Fuji portrait lens, I can absolutely recommend the Viltrox 56mm 1.7 XF. But I don't like everything about this lens and can absolutely identify some areas where it may fall short of some of your expectations. The lens hood, while included, and that is most definitely appreciated, is not the easiest to seat into the threads. I often find myself fumbling the attaching of this lens hood, and sometimes it doesn't lock in at all and just keeps spinning. While not the end of the world, it's still a minor annoyance. Unlike the Viltrox Pro Series, this lens does not feature an aperture ring. While this doesn't bother me because I can take or leave the aperture ring, if you're a Fuji purist, this may bother you. I just use the rear command dial on my X-H2 to mirror how I shoot on my Canon cameras, but I've heard people say that no aperture ring is a deal breaker for them, so this could be a deal breaker for you. For $180, I think that it's reasonable that a lens would not have an aperture ring, but I know there's a strong enough chorus of Fuji users out there who live and die by the aperture ring, so this is going to be a con for them. There is no weather sealing. I think that's a lofty expectation for such an inexpensive lens, and I did say in the pros that the build quality is fantastic. So while this doesn't boast weather sealing, I'm not exactly going to freak out if it's attached to my body and it starts to drizzle. Nonetheless, if this were sold at $185 instead of $180 because they put a 3-cent gasket on it, I'd pay the extra $5. As I mentioned earlier in the video portion, this lens does suffer from focus breathing, which makes it less than ideal for videographers. I am being a bit nitpicky with my cons because in reality for $180, there's not a lot to complain about, and even the focus breathing isn't going to be that big of a deal for most of you because you're likely purchasing this lens for portrait stills, where this lens is, for the money, exceptional. My final thoughts on this lens are that Viltrox has done it again. They made a budget lens that is solid, sharp, lets in a lot of light, has a great feel, and is within the budget of almost all photographers. Yet it can produce professional looking results. Because of that, I have to say that the Viltrox 56mm 1.7 is the best value of any budget portrait lens for the entire Fuji X lineup. That's quite an accomplishment considering the fact that there's a lot of traffic in the 56mm market. That does it for today's episode. I want to thank each and every one of you for watching today. If you like what you saw, tell me about it in the comments below. Do you own this 56mm 1.7 from Viltrox? Tell me about that in the comments below. And if you like this channel, I am humbly asking you to please click the subscribe button below. And if you like the presets that I use throughout this episode, they are available for purchase for both Lightroom and Capture One on my website. And until next time, I'll talk to you soon. Bye.